Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are scrapping on a sword, figuratively speaking, of course, and taking a deep, critical cut into the world of Wuxia. Specifically, we're plunging into the vast, intricate, and, well, often quite cynical universe created by Gulong. I mean, arguably the most influential novelist of modern Chinese martial arts fiction.
He really is. If you're looking at the foundational DNA of action, cinema, TV series, popular culture across East Asia, especially over the last half century.
Yeah.
You were inevitably talking about Gulong. It's just the sheer volume of adaptations his work has generated is staggering.
Absolutely. It cements his place, doesn't it, as this enduring cultural powerhouse, even, long after his passing. He was born June 7, 1938, and his shadow is just so long. His stories feel timeless.
And that enduring influence, especially in cinema, that's precisely what we need to dig into today.
Yeah.
Our goal isn't like a catalog of every single adaptation out there. That would be impossible. Instead, our mission is sharp. We're focusing on the really specific, memorable film versions, the ones that truly defined a generation of Hong Kong cinema. And crucially, those films that maybe took the biggest narrative risks.
Okay.
We need to dissect exactly how those screen versions stack up against the highly complex, dramatic original novels, particularly where the adaptation diverges, sometimes radically.
Yeah, we're hunting for those brilliant little nuggets of cinematic choice, aren't we? Those moments where a director just perfectly captured the writer's intent with maybe one visual detail, or conversely, chose to fundamentally rewrite a hero's defining trait, all for the sake of the silver screen. Why were those decisions made, and what did they cost artistically?
Yeah, precisely. And what's fascinating here, I think, is when you analyze which adaptations are universally seen as the most defining, the most personally favored, the most aesthetically influential, one specific creative nexus just keeps coming up.
Which is?
The films directed by Hong Kong master Chor Yuen and produced by the legendary studio Shaw Brothers.
Okay. The Shaw Brothers connection.
Yeah. That partnership didn't just adapt Gulong, they visually codified him for millions of viewers.
Okay, let's unpack that crucial connection then. Why did the Chor Yuen Shaw Brothers films become, the benchmark? They certainly weren't the first to tackle Gulong, so what was it about their approach, their specific look maybe? What made them the defining adaptations for so many fans?
Well, if you connect this to the bigger picture of adaptation history in Hong Kong, the Chor Yuen Shaw Brothers partnership meant, first off, immediate resources and a highly distinct visual mandate. Shaw Brothers was, the industrial behemoth of the time.
Right, they had the money, the clout.
Exactly. They possessed massive permanent studio sets.
Yeah.
Everything from opulent imperial courts to these misty stylized forests. And their resources let them hire the era's biggest stars, people like T. Lung, Derek Yee.
So it wasn't just about the story itself, it was about the scale and the look.
Absolutely. Their style was highly theatrical. You see it characterized by these lavish, intricately detailed sets, heavy use of studio smoke.
Oh yeah, the smoke machine.
It's like dramatic high-contrast lighting. This aesthetic often made the films feel less like, say, historical epics shot out on location and more like stage plays, very intense, very contained. And this deliberate choice actually suited Gulong perfectly because, earlier Wuxia often favored maybe grittier location shot action, sometimes even black and white or with lower production values.
But Gulong's novels, they're different, aren't they? Compared to someone like Jin Young, whose stories are maybe more straightforward chivalry tales, Gulong's are dialogue heavy, deeply psychological.
Yes.
Full of this noir-like atmosphere, intense conversations in dark taverns, intricate webs of betrayal, hidden identities.
That's the key synergy right there.
Yeah.
Chor Yuen brought this highly stylized, almost poetic sensibility that really matched the drama of Gulong's dialogue. He managed to translate that intense, often cynical, psychological quality onto the screen.
How did the sets play into that?
Well, the theatrical staging and the dramatic lighting enhanced the mystery and the internal anguish of Gulong's heroes. It focused everything on atmosphere and character intensity, even if it meant sometimes sacrificing strict geographical or maybe chronological fidelity to the original plots.
So the visual standard these films set was one of high drama, aesthetic intensity, and deliberate artificiality almost.
Yes, exactly. This aesthetic choice elevated the narrative from just a simple martial arts adventure to this dramatic, almost operatic tale of intrigue and betrayal.
It sounds like they created a whole visual language for Gulong.
They really did. What's fascinating is that these aesthetic decisions effectively created a visual language for Gulong. Future generations of filmmakers, well, they either had to replicate that intense theatrical Shaw Brothers drama, or they had to deliberately rebel against it by trying to make a more realistic, maybe more grounded Gulong story.
They set the benchmark.
They set the benchmark for translating his complex, often cynical heroes who, let's face it, rely on wit and cunning just as much as martial prowess onto the big screen. They realized that the spirit of Gulong was in the drama and the dialogue, not just the spectacular sword fights,
It seems like they saw the psychological drama within the Wuxia, and they amplified it using the tools they had, the dramatic scope of the studio system.
And this choice, this prioritizing of atmosphere over absolute plot fidelity, that's the defining characteristic we're going to see throughout our analysis today. It really proves that to adapt successfully, you have to first understand the medium you're adapting to. Cinema has different demands than a novel.
Okay, let's move into some specific case studies then. Looking at how this creative partnership tackled individual novels, let's start with one that really exemplifies complexity, Meteor Butterfly Sword. Great title. This film featured a really powerful ensemble cast, Zanhua, Jingli, Gufeng, Yuhua. But the fascinating detail we need to dive into revolves around a single, highly specific prop, a weapon.
Yes, and this is where the genius of cinematic metaphor often resides, I think. Wuxia is a genre that's defined by legendary, almost mythical swords, right?
Yeah.
The Green Destiny, Heaven Sword, Dragon Saber.
Sure.
Yet in Meteor Butterfly Sword, we get something highly technical. Almost feels like it's out of a modern action film, in a way. We need to zero in on the signature weapon used by Yuhua's character, Lu Shangshuan, right at the film's climax. The Fangtianhuaji.
Okay, the Fangtianhuaji. Now, historically, that's a traditional Chinese polearm, isn't it? Known for its distinctive double crescent blades. But what the source material highlights is its complexity. In the film, it was portrayed as this device that could be completely assembled and disassembled, like a precision instrument built from multiple components.
Right. And what's truly critical here is the narrative function of having this highly technical, multi-part weapon appear right at the climax of a martial arts film. I mean, why introduce this element of engineering when Wuxia typically relies on, raw strength, maybe mystical qi, or a sword forged from meteorite iron?
So what does it signify?
Well, the Fangtianhuaji, as this disassembled and then assembled weapon, brings a really grounded mechanical precision to the duel. It's almost the antithesis of the mystical.
It implies the character isn't just a master of martial arts, but maybe a master of logistics, preparation, precision engineering even.
Exactly. It's almost like a weapon of betrayal, hidden, packaged away, and assembled only at the necessary calculated moment. The ability to manage and deploy a complex, multi-component weapon suggests that Lu Shangshuan is relying less on natural talent, maybe, and more on calculated strategy and technical superiority. It means his power resides not in spontaneous genius, perhaps, but in the meticulous management of complex components.
So the weapon itself becomes a metaphor.
It becomes a perfect visual metaphor for the intricate plotting, the corporate espionage, the calculated betrayals that really define the world of Gulong. The fight isn't won by the stronger man, necessarily, but by the one with a better engineered device. It's quite cynical, really.
That's a fascinating inversion of the Wuxia trope, isn't it? Replacing the spiritual weight of a weapon with its technical complexity. The fight becomes a challenge of engineering and intelligence, not just brute force or inner power.
It makes the choice of weapon a critical piece of characterization. It reveals the character's core nature as a strategist and manipulator, rather than just a straightforward martial hero. Really clever stuff.
Okay, moving on from that technical problem in characterization, let's pivot to a structural problem in the source material itself with our next case study. White Jade Tiger.
White Jade Tiger. Yes, the problem with the novel is actually quite instructive for anyone studying adaptation. The original novel, while apparently praised for its strong initial premise, it reportedly suffers from a narrative weakness. Apparently, the story starts strong, but then kind of ends poorly. It struggles to maintain pace and deliver a really satisfying resolution in the final act.
So, the filmmakers, Chor, Yuen, and Shaw Brothers, they're facing a commercially viable property, a known name, but with this known structural flaw. A great premise that needed, radical surgery to ensure cinematic success. What was their solution?
Their solution was radical and, arguably brilliant for the time. They fundamentally shifted the genre.
How so?
Instead of just trying to tighten the loose threads of the martial arts story, maybe patch up the ending, they turned the entire narrative into something much closer to a spy drama.
A Wuxia spy drama. Wow. That immediately suggests a switch, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From spectacle to suspicion. From open battlefields to whispered secrets.
Exactly. Traditional Wuxia often relies on clear moral codes, clan feuds, honor-bound confrontations, all very open.
Right.
But a spy drama, especially the kind Chor Yuen excelled at, is defined by secrets, hidden identities, constant misdirection, plot twists driven by dialogue, paranoia, revelation, rather than necessarily prolonged action sequences.
So they leaned into the intrigue.
They leaned heavily into the intrigue. By embracing espionage, the film adaptation was able to address that structural issue of the flagging ending. It basically replaced the need for escalating combat, which maybe the original novel couldn't sustain, with a constant stream of revelation and dramatic, often shocking misdirection. Kept the audience hooked in a different way.
That sounds like a pretty tactical commercial move. I wonder, was there any backlash at the time for, watering down the martial arts to prioritize dialogue and intrigue?
It was definitely a calculated risk, but it seems to have paid off because it maintained the spirit of Gulong's intrigue, which is so central, while fixing the structural weakness of the novel itself. I mean, Shaw Brothers was known for its choreography, absolutely. But this move signaled to the audience, okay, this is Wuxia for the mind, not just the muscle. And it offers a really crucial insight for adaptation, I think. Successful adaptation sometimes demands radical surgery. If the source material has a known structural battlefield, as it were, the screen version has to be ruthless in fixing it. Even if that means changing the fundamental feel of the story from, say, open, glorious combat to these clandestine, almost noir-like operations.
So it's the ultimate lesson in respecting the narrative spirit of the author by paradoxically, ruthlessly disrespecting the original plot structure when needed for the screen.
Well put. Sometimes you have to break it to save it, cinematically speaking.
Okay, now we move to arguably the most celebrated figure in Gulong's entire canon, the protagonist of El Espadachín Sentimental, or the Sentimental Swordsman. This is the tragic, poetic figure of Li Xunhuan.
Li Xunhuan. He's absolutely one of the genre's most iconic creations. He's defined by, his lethal throwing darts, right? The little live-flying dagger, that small ivory carving he obsessively handles.
Yes.
His deep melancholia, and this crippling moral landscape rooted in past regrets, particularly involving his lost love, Lin Qian.
And casting the leading man of Shaw Brothers, the huge star Ti Lung, in the role. That must have been a massive cultural statement at the time.
Oh, huge. And the performance itself is generally considered good. Ti Lung was always charismatic. But the common critique of that specific interpretation is incredibly revealing about this clash between star casting and literary fidelity.
And the core critique, as noted in our sources, is that the film version of Li Xunhuan just comes across as too cheerful, too joyful.
Exactly. Which creates this fundamental, really critical dissonance with the source material. Because the original Li Xunhuan is explicitly described as decadent.
Decadent. We need to unpack what that means in this context.
Right. It's not just sadness, is it? It implies a weariness with the world, a self-destructive streak, maybe a moral dissipation, or at least a man profoundly weighed down by sorrows, constantly relying on wine and philosophical suffering rather than physical rigor. This decadence is the visual signifier of his tragedy, his failure in many ways, to be that traditional heroic figure. He's coughing blood, he's drinking constantly.
And Ti Lung, the star. He was inherently cast as the heroic, dashing, physically perfect lead, wasn't he? His established screen persona, his natural charisma, seems like it overwrote the character's core psychological flaw.
It feels like it. The film prioritized the star's heroic image over the literary fidelity of this broken, weary, and deeply decadent swordsman.
So the commercial imperative trumped the artistic necessity, perhaps?
It seems that way, and it raises that critical question.
Yeah.
Can you truly portray a sentimental and tragic swordsman whose defining characteristic is self-imposed suffering and dissolution if the actor playing him just projects too much natural heroism and vigor?
So the audience gets a successful, engaging performance from a star they love.
Right.
But they lose that specific flavor of broken elegance and moral exhaustion that really defined Li Xunhuan on the page.
Yeah, it's the difference between a hero who is merely sad, maybe brooding, and a hero who is actively self-sabotaging because he's basically resigned himself to a life of sorrow. Yeah. The film, perhaps unintentionally, just smoothed out the sharp edges of his moral complexity to fit the star.
Interesting.
But what's fascinating here is that while the protagonist's central emotional landscape was, let's say, diluted, the adaptation apparently found its perfect fidelity in the secondary lead. Let's talk about Ah Fei.
A Fei, right, like Shunwan's loyal, much wilder companion, played by Derek Yee.
Yes, and Ah-Fei is the untamed contrast to Li Shunwan's sophisticated sorrow.
So what made Yee's portrayal such a perfect fit, according to the sources?
This is apparently a textbook example of character fidelity hitting the mark.
Oh.
Derek Yee's portrayal is pretty much universally described as perfect because he captured not just the wild nature of Ah-Fei the lone wolf aspect, but a specific physical detail that Gu Long really emphasized in the novel.
Which was?
His penetrating gaze.
The piercing gaze. Okay. Why is that specific visual trait so critical to understanding Ah-Fei?
Well, Gu Long often relied on these highly specific physical attributes, not just costumes or weapons, but eyes, hands, specific mannerisms to define his heroes almost instantly on the page. Ah-Fei is meant to be sharp, feral, almost animalistic in his focus. He's constantly observing, ready to strike, and crucially, uncorrupted by the social politics and emotional baggage that poison Li Shunwan.
So the gaze signifies his nature.
Exactly. A penetrating gaze suggests a character who sees through deception, who lives by instinct, who possesses an intense focus that the more decadent, world-weary characters have lost. It's about clarity and intensity.
So Yee somehow managed to convey the inner life of Ah-Fei, his suspicion, his untamed energy, his unwavering loyalty through that one specific visual element, his eyes, which perfectly aligned with the novel's explicit description.
It seems so. And it really proves that sometimes, maybe all it takes is that one small, precise physical detail to make a character feel utterly authentic on screen, even if the main protagonist has been cosmetically or emotionally altered for cinematic reasons.
So Ah-Fei became the yardstick of fidelity in that film.
Precisely because his character perhaps lacked the kind of star image baggage that came with casting T-Lung as the central tragic hero. It's quite neat, actually.
Yeah, the character who sees through all the BS became the most faithfully adapted character. That's quite poetic, isn't it, given the cynical nature of Gu Long's world?
It really is.
Okay, let's look at another major adaptation, Tianya Minyu Dao, or Moonlight Blade, which, again, starred the popular T-Lung as the protagonist, Fu Hongxue. Now, if the change in Li Shunwan was about psychological feel, decadent versus cheerful, the change in Fu Hongxue is about a radical physical departure from the source, one that really challenges the very meaning of the hero's struggle.
As this is arguably the most significant divergence we've covered today. And it's where commercial cinema really clashes, maybe most violently, with literary purpose. Because in the original Gu Long novel, Fu Hongxue is defined in large part by physical affliction. Yeah. He is a cripple. He has a limp.
And the epilepsy, wasn't it?
Yes, he also suffers from epilepsy. He's physically compromised in multiple ways.
Okay. And yet, in the Chor Yuen film adaptation, starring the very physically dynamic T-Lung, Fu Hongxue is not a cripple. He moves with grace, speed, embodying that standard, powerful Shaw Brothers hero image.
This is just a fundamental rewriting of the character, and we really have to consider the impact of that. In traditional martial arts narratives, and particularly in Gu Long's work, a key physical disability serves a profound narrative function.
How so?
Well, it defines the character's vulnerability, right? It highlights the intensity of their internal struggle, and it elevates their eventual mastery, their skill, into this incredible triumph of willpower over physical limitation. That psychological depth added by the constant physical battle against his own body, that's what defines Fu Hongxue's internal tragedy and his isolation in the novel.
So by removing the disability, the filmmakers basically remove that layer of profound internal vulnerability.
Pretty much. They essentially trade this nuanced, tragic figure defined by immense psychological struggle for a more straightforward, physically perfect martial artist. One designed for the high-octane action sequences that fit the star's capabilities and the studio's style.
It streamlines the action, makes it easier to choreograph, fits the star image of T-Lung.
Exactly. But it sacrifices the core element of the character's complexity. If the hero is no longer struggling against the constraints of his own flesh, well, the meaning of his victory is kind of diminished, isn't it? It ceases to be a triumph of the spirit overcoming the physical self, and it just becomes a demonstration of superior fighting technique, which frankly is far less interesting from a Gu Long perspective.
And this commercial need, perhaps, to make the character physically perfect led to an interesting substitution. Our source material notes another specific physical change. Fu Hongxue's sword in the film has a distinctive iron chain attached to it.
Yes. And this, I think, is a brilliant directorial solution to the problem created by removing the disability. It's like the external physical attributes of the weapon are brought in to replace the internal physical attributes of the character.
Explain that. How does that work?
Well, the chain adds a new complexity, right?
Yeah.
A tangible logistical challenge to the fighting style. It gives the character an external, visible difficulty to overcome, the chain's weight, its unpredictable swing, maybe its restricted range,
Okay, I see.
which visually replaces the internal personal difficulty of the disability. The audience still sees a hero struggling with some kind of impediment, but that impediment is now this stylish, manageable tool of the trade, not an inescapable tragedy of the body.
So the cinematic flair of the weapon, the chain whip sword, effectively compensates for removing the character's internal defining pain. The film remains visually interesting, the fighting is challenging for the protagonist, but the meaning behind the struggle is shifted entirely to a flashy external device.
Yeah, it's the difference between drama derived from suffering,
Yeah.
internal suffering, and drama derived from choreography. And you can see why they did it. The demands of commercial cinema, specifically the need for a major star like T-Lung to be physically dynamic and appeal to the action market, likely led to this substitution. They kept the need for visual hardship, but they made it external, controllable, and visually spectacular, rather than intrinsic and tragic.
But even as the hero underwent these pretty radical physical changes, the film apparently delivered a truly memorable antagonist, Gong Ziyu. The sources specifically highlight that the villain possesses a captivating voice. It's an interesting detail. It adds this unexpected sensory layer to the villainy.
Yeah, Gong Ziyu is often cited as one of Chor Yuen's best villains. And the focus on his voice is essential. I think it suggests hidden power, charisma, perhaps deception, much like the unseen peacock feather that's mentioned later. But it's really his philosophy, crystallized in one powerful line of dialogue, that confirms the philosophical essence of Gulong's world remained intact, even if Fu Hongxu's legs did not.
Okay, let's dive into that quote, because it sounds strikingly profound, especially coming from a martial arts villain. Although you can't see the peacock feather in my hand, you should be able to see the white hairs I have accumulated over the past few decades in search of money and desire.
That quote is just a masterclass in summarizing the cynical core of the Gulong universe. First off, the reference to the peacock feather that immediately establishes deception, hidden power, misdirection. The true threat is always unseen, psychological, or manipulative. That's classic Gulong intrigue right there.
Okay, but then he pivots, doesn't he? From that abstract, almost fantasy idea to the deeply grounded, cynical realities of human motivation. He mentions white hairs, the decay of age, and the decades he spent chasing money and desire.
Exactly. This grounds the entire fantastical martial arts story in these universal truths of human corruption, greed, and aging. The villain isn't just seeking dominance in the Jianghu, the martial world. He is explicitly motivated by decades of materialistic hunger and moral erosion. He's basically admitting that his mastery, his power, it's built not on spiritual enlightenment or some noble cause, but on simple, protracted human corruption.
Wow. It connects the fantastical struggle right back to the real-world motivations of greed and power that are really the engine of all Gulong's complex plots, aren't they?
Absolutely. It confirms that even when the physical representation of the hero departs radically from the source, the cynical philosophical essence of the world, often channeled through the dialogue of the villain, can remain perfectly intact. The film may have changed Fu Hongxu's physical reality, but it seems it perfectly preserved the corruption of Gong Ziyu's soul.
So in the end, the physical struggle was sacrificed for cinematic flow, maybe star power, but the philosophical struggle remained, ironically preserved by the antagonist's perfect fidelity to Gulong's cynical worldview.
It's a fascinating trade-off, isn't it? #tag outro.
This has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive, really getting into the weeds of that complex negotiation between great literature and the demands of the commercial screen. We've seen these critical differences laid bare, haven't we? The psychologically decadent Li Xunhuan becoming the more, cheerful cinematic star, and the crippled, tragic Fu Hongxu transforming into a physically perfect fighter, but with that spectacular chained sword.
And we've unearthed the importance of those specific details, like the technical assembly of the Fangtian Huaji and Meteor Butterfly sword, acting as this clever metaphor for cynical, engineered plotting.
Yeah.
And the perfect casting of Derek Yee's penetrating gaze as Ah Fei, confirming that sometimes a single visual trait can capture a character's essence more effectively, perhaps, than the protagonist's entire altered narrative arc.
Ultimately, the analysis really suggests that these Chor Yuen brothers adaptations are so enduring, precisely because they understood that cinema required different kinds of risks than serialized novels. They embraced genre shifts, like we saw with White Jade Tiger.
There's a bi-thriller element.
They prioritized that dramatic visual style, that unique Shaw Brothers look, and they were willing to make radical character changes, like removing Fu Hongsu's defining disability to fit the demands of star image and action pacing. They sacrificed maybe textural rigidity for visual and dramatic impact.
And that leads, I think, to our final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you consider these adaptations, or maybe go back and watch them. We saw the sentimental swordsman achieve this high fidelity in a crucial supporting detail, Ah Fei's penetrating gaze, while arguably diluting the core tragedy of the protagonist, Li Shunhuan. Conversely, Moonlight Blade stripped its protagonist of his defining physical tragedy, Fu Hongsu's disability, but it perfectly preserved the cynical philosophical commentary through the villain, through Gong Ziyu's brilliant quote about white hairs, money, and desire.
Right.
So which type of adaptation is ultimately more successful at preserving the spirit of Gulong's original work? Should the physical reality of the hero, the explicit details of their suffering as written, be prioritized? Or is it more important to preserve the cynical philosophical essence of the world they inhabit, even if the hero is made visually better or more palatable for the camera?
That's a tough one.
It is. Think about where the heart of the story truly lies for you. Is it in the struggle of the individual body against its limits, or in the critique of the corruption within the wider human society? Which fidelity matters more?